that moment where you want to install a new npm package and you're like typing it in like npm install the package name, and then you're like, should I click the button, like the return key? Should I click the enter key? And you're like not entirely sure what will happen. Is your hard drive is going to get deleted, your environment variable is going to get sent to somewhere else. What exactly are you going to bring in? That emotional state is very real. I think a lot of developers may relate to it once they're
You're listening to episode number 24 of 20 Minute JavaScript, where we discuss everything JavaScript related with members from the community. As you probably know by now, this episode is hosted by OpenReplay, an open source session replay platform for developers. If you'd like to know more, visit openreplay.com. I'm Fernando, your host and potential evil twin living across the world. And today we're going to discuss a topic that should be of interest to everyone: security in the JavaScript ecosystem. We're going to discuss how secure web development practices are and what can developers do to make them even more secure. And for such a topic, I brought one of the experts from our community, Liran Tal. He's a security researcher and dev advocate for Snyk. You'll probably see him around with his Yoda hat. So Liran, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining us, and please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Fernando. Thank you for having me. Um, my name is Liran. I'm a developer advocate at Snyk. Basically, kind of like working with developers on anything related to like secure coding conventions, web security, JavaScript security, and Node.js security in specific. So like this is the domain where I'm at. So a lot of that recently has been translated into supply chain security. I'm also a security researcher, so I actually spend time finding vulnerabilities in libraries or just generally in maybe misarchitected measures of the web.
All right, interesting. Okay, and yeah, and definitely that is the topic that we're going to be covering today: security in the JavaScript ecosystem, especially. Can you tell us a little bit about what's the status on it? How secure is the ecosystem right now? And also, if you don't mind, explaining what you mean by supply chain security or something like that. You said, because it sounds like it's about something else, but it's actually about what the workflow that we do, right? How we turn code into an application.
Yes, definitely. So it's an interesting observation, Fernando, because especially today, supply chain security is something that we may not think about too much in terms of like how it affects us. But essentially, developers like you, myself, people listening to us, they play a very key role in this world of application security. And we're seeing growing trends of security incidents. We're seeing growing trends in other places related to security incidents, not even in the JavaScript ecosystem, but generally, cyber security attacks and attempts. And so, I think what people might relate to the most is that moment where you want to install a new npm package and you're like typing it in like npm install the package name, and then you're like, should I click the button, like the return key? Should I click the enter key? And you're like not entirely sure what will happen. Is your hard drive is going to get deleted, your environment variable is going to get sent to somewhere else. What exactly are you going to bring in? That emotional state is very real. I think a lot of developers may relate to it once they're like understanding the concept, and even less. But the thing is, connecting that now back to supply chain security, this is one aspect of supply chain security is the libraries that we use, right? That's the supply chain. It's not just the code that we write, it's also everything that makes it up. And the supply itself is something like the npm registry, which has like over 2 million packages which we can all use. But we're kind of like a bit afraid of maybe installing a package or not, and how should we do it securely? Like what are the things that can go wrong? And I can give you some stats that actually back it up from like a science perspective, like a research perspective as well.
Okay, but first, that existential threat that you described, That might be. I mean, I have to admit, I've never felt it, and it's not a good
Okay.
thing actually. It's not a good thing. I admit it, and I wasn't even aware of that. That was a problem until a while ago. Until I started researching about this topic and I started reading about the kind of supply chain problems that were
Yeah.
happening with, especially with NPM. But I don't think there are a lot of developers who actually, you know, think, what am I doing when I hit that enter key? They're more like, sure, another npm package, bring it on, I don't care, it's there, it's supposed to be good because it's on npm. But the problem is, anyone can polish on npm, and that's the main issue, I think. And I want to get into that in a bit, because
Yeah.
some interesting things have happened after installing some packages. So let's talk about the before we get there, what are the most common attack vectors? How are we looking at insecure code or supply chain aspects of it as well?
All right. So maybe before even diving into that, I'll just mention I think supply chain is also not just the security aspect. Like that's a very obvious, red alert thing, but also to an extent, it's also the fact that one open source package is brings with it other open source packages, right? Like it's the overall health of the amount of packages that you bring in and the amount of the dependencies. So one thing that I think developers probably relate to a lot is the dependable updates, right? Like keep up with this version and that version and jest and the other thing and whatever. And so like it never ends and you constantly need to update. And that is because like one of those research articles is is kind of talking about the fact that an average npm package installation kind of like introduces this implicit trust on 79 other third-party packages and 39 other maintainers. So like when you're installing the average npm package, you're like now dependent on like tens of other packages and tens of other maintainers, and that is already at that point is a supply chain issue for you because that may be like an unmaintained package. Or what happens if tomorrow there's like everything now is secured, but tomorrow there's like a new vulnerability? What do we do? So that's kind of like the state where we are, where the package health is also like super important. And some of the aspects of security issues that we've seen has definitely been about malicious attackers kind of to your question, kind of uh, I would say exploiting some of the npm capabilities, like the fact that the npm CLI or the package manager allows a maintainer to run arbitrary commands, which is sometimes useful for like if you need to like natively compile code. So you need to like invoke maybe the compiler when you install a dependency. Node SAS works that way, for example, because it's like a native C kind of extension for Node.js. And there's like other ways of doing it or other reasons for doing it. But also because npm is like an open ecosystem, essentially you just need like an email verified and you have like a developer account. So at that point, you can just go ahead and submit a malicious package that when it gets installed does whatever it wants on the developer machine. And that's kind of like where things get hairy. It's not the only vector of attack, but it's the one that we've seen probably mostly prominent.
Absolutely. And problem is, that's crazy. 79 other packages on average, and
Yep.
you're clearly never installing just one package. But the thing is, if you think about that huge tree or graph, if you will, of dependency, you can't really consider the alternative being, and I've read actually a lot of developers speaking this way, to just re-implement everything yourself because you actually it's gonna be secure and so on. That's not practical to, when you're building a production ready application and on an enterprise level and so on. So what do you do here? I mean, how can we trust npm ever again after hearing this, and not think, well, I need to now start re-implementing every single library I'm using because I don't know what's happening there.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is now kind of like discussing what can we do, like what are the countermeasures, and I mean, I am not going to suggest anyone to like start rewriting the code for everything. Like that's not a
Clearly, yeah.
yeah, it's not like a practical advice for anyone to do.
Yeah,
Plus, I love open source. So, like I'm good with let's use what exists, but it requires some due diligence. Like you can't just use anything, right? You can't just pick up whatever library off the street and just use it. There's some due diligence that I think developers might be doing when they introduce like a new thing. Like when you go into a project, in a team, you probably don't. The first thing is probably you're not gonna open the package JSON and the package log file and starts like wandering around it and like saying, hey, I know
Right.
this or I know that, right? You're not doing that. But probably like when you're a developer and you need a new functionality, like you're thinking, hey, maybe there's like an npm package for it. I would hope that you're doing some kind of active proactive due diligence for it, as in you are checking the package is maintained. It did have a release like in the last 12 months. There's like a regular cadence of commits. Like the issue queue is healthy, maintainers are active, collaborators are active in the issue queue or something like that. So I mean, that kind of thing is like a very 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 like first steps of something that you should do, like a good healthy sign. Especially you can take it further, like does the package have tests, is it well documented, other things that are talking about quality as well. um, other I would say advice or tips on like how do you maybe choose your packages wisely is perhaps think of maybe choosing packages that were also chosen or used in other popular maintainers projects. For example, like Matteo Collina is a very prolific maintainer for a lot of npm packages and also like on the Node.js project, etc. So he maintains Fastify. So for example, if you need a logging library, I would very much advise you to use Pinot, which is one of the of his popular projects that are providing that rather than something else, because it will probably have better maintenance, better security updates and all of those things. But also, here's a tip: like you could also take a look at, for example, Fastify, which is also maintained by the Nearform team and Matteo and his team, and you could like look at what other packages they rely upon, and that kind of like maybe gives you an idea of what to trust, what not to trust. And Matteo is one, but there are like other like Sindres and Benjamin Coe and another bunch of other developers who are like very a tight bunch, kind of to say,
Right.
within the npm ecosystem. But it's a good signal to use.
Right. Okay. But that's definitely, like you said, a great actually first step. Looking at into the library that you want to use and see if it's stable, if it's actively worked on, and so on. But recently, I may be like mixing up libraries because this hasn't happened just once. But I think it was the Color.js library that was used by thousands of hundreds, thousands of other packages. Was it that with that one that the maintainer said, "I'm done with it. I don't want to work with it anymore." And someone stepped up and said, "Sure, I'll maintain it for you." And the guy just gave it to him. And that guy, that the second guy, the new maintainer, added malicious code into it, pushed out a new version, and then suddenly every single application on earth was having, was it like their
Yeah,
Bitcoin wallet stolen or something like that. I mean,
correct.
that package was active, being maintained. It had everything you just mentioned, but still,
um not exactly like
all
that
right,
was a package that was actually like had a red flag. So
okay,
for me,
interesting.
like I would say, so the package in question, like this is the event stream incident, right? This is from
Yeah, yeah, that one, yeah,
all real stories, not that long time ago, about maybe 4 years back or so. And essentially, what happened is EventStream existed on the npm ecosystem for like a decade by that point, so it was very well used. Millions of install a week or something like that. So very well, probably not a direct dependency that you would know, but it's
yeah,
like being used by like Webpack and all of those kind of things. So like you have used it if you wanted to or not, to an extent. Indeed, it was kind of like not really unmaintained. It was Dominic Tarr, who is again another very popular npm package maintainer, because he maintains also like 500 or whatever other npm modules. So it's very busy, and this kind of like reached kind of like end of not end of life, but like it's reached maturity, right? Like this
right,
is the package. There's nothing else like to do about it. as you described, like someone came in, said, I want to even improve it, fix the bug, added a feature, whatever, then added their package to the dependency tree, then they control it. So at that point, every time that you install EventStream, you also install that package, which now they control, and they can run whatever code they want on your machine. So at that point, I would say actually EventStream was one of those packages who would have been considered as being an abandoned package. So remember, I was talking about research, academic research articles and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So a few years ago, there was also another a research article which was comparing abandoned packages on npm and PyPI, and its criteria for an abandoned package was uh, if the package did not have a release in the last 12 months, it would have been considered abandoned. Okay, so we could agree whether like that's a good enough measure, whether we
Yeah.
did 2 years, whatever, but like that was the criteria. And they found out that um, on npm, I think it's the number is 60 something, is like a 65 or whatever percent of npm packages that did not have a release in the last 12
Wow.
months. And that's like a big part of the registry that's like you could consider that as like unmaintained. uh, so from that perspective, that's the red flag I was referring to. It's not
Okay.
really an active maintained one, even though it was like popularly downloaded, it wasn't really actively maintained. And so I think to an extent that's why they targeted it. Also they indeed were able to actually employ a successful attack that injected a backdoor to a cryptocurrency wallet application that was built using this package in the tree. And that wallet application was actually publishing two versions that were including the malicious payload, which was indeed like stealing cryptocurrency.
All right. Okay. So it wasn't exactly what I said, but looking into it, my point was you can do the due diligence up to a point. The more you know about it, like you, the better it'll be. The less you know about it, like me, the less relevant or the less useful it'll be. So, security dumb people like me, do we have like an alternative to secure projects in a way that we can be sure that we're doing it right, or do we just rely on doing this manual checking and hoping that I did enough research to make sure that there is no red flag I skipped?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think it's not about being a security dumb or not. I think it's just like there's so much things to worry about in terms of
Yeah.
security. I would have installed that package myself without reading the code either, so like it would have been able to like impact me too. So um, it's good that we try to do those kind of things and we're aware of them. And like I think most people maybe listening to this might be like now more aware, and that's like a really good education and awareness piece that you're doing for the ecosystem. So like thank you, Fernando, for taking the time to like improve the education for this. And so some tips there are, first off, when you install packages, uh, please, when you do like those npm install kind of things, please provide minus minus or dash dash ignore scripts to the npm CLI. What it does is it tells the npm CLI to not run any install related scripts or hooks to the lifecycle of the npm package installation by any of the dependent libraries, the npm packages, or their dependencies. So like it just doesn't allow anyone to run anything, and that's what you want. You do not want anybody to run anything else. It's a good first countermeasure because it would have been helpful, for example, with the event stream incident that we just talked about. It would have been helpful with like um, Node IPC, some other incident that we've heard about, and so it's a good way. It's not like the best
Right.
and the most efficient countermeasure because, for example, we can talk about the colors incident, which was um, the maintainer sabotaging their own codes, but instead of like adding an installation script, they because like they relied on people actually using the package like API, like the actual code path, they introduced a denial of service vulnerability there. So even though, for example, nothing would have run on your like installation machine, but like if you deploy it to production tomorrow and that code path would have been triggered, there would be a denial of service within your application, for example. So there are obviously other ways to like cause bad things. But with security, a lot of the time, what you really want to do is, because there's like, no silver bullet for anything,
True.
you essentially want to like have a good trade-off. You essentially want to like take the risk off as much as you can. So minus, that minus ignore script is a good one. And we're trying to, I'll also like mention there's like the OpenSSF. This is the Open Source Security Foundation. There are a lot of working groups there. One of them is Package Manager Best Practices. And I will give a huge shout out to Jordan Howard, who's like doing a bunch of like really good work in terms of proposing best practices to be streamlined to developers in terms of what we need to do for the npm ecosystem. So definitely follow that, like if you're interested in any of this. And I'm trying to also like curate and write a lot of best practices and advices on like the Snyk blog for all of those kind of things for developers.
All right. So, all right. The short answer is educate yourself. You don't have to become an expert, but at least be aware that this is a problem, and that you have to be at least aware that this could happen, and that there are people explaining vulnerabilities and explaining solutions and explaining how to best practices to avoid it. So yeah, definitely we'll add links to articles and to these sites that you mentioned on the show notes so people that can find them.
Yeah, we'll do.
Yeah. Okay. So what about the things that we use daily, like the most common frameworks out there? Um, Leaving the supply chain for a second and looking at code specifically. And or maybe I'm not, because when you're running with a framework, you're not just importing their code, you're importing the tooling as well around it. Are we like supposed to stay away from some of these common frameworks because they have known or vulnerabilities, or because they are ignoring security at some point, like Express or Next, or I don't know, what have
Mhm.
you? Are there, is there like a list of most secure or least secure frameworks around?
It's a good question, Fernando. I don't think we have that list, nor do I think that we want to have it, because to an extent, security bugs are just like bugs in general. Like
Fair
they
enough.
happen at one point in time. Like the more code you add, the more likelihood of bugs to happen, as well as security issues. So I don't think we're like aiming at having this like wall of fame of like the best secure libraries. But instead, what I would want to have, and that maybe relates back to like the supply chain, from like how do you choose a package, is having those packages which are their maintainers are able to like maybe react fast with, like, if a security vulnerability was found in the library, then you want to make sure that the maintainer is able to address it, fix it, publish a release in time, etc. So like you do not have this like window of exposure for a long time. Now, I guess back to that question about like what should you worry about. So there are two things with those frameworks that are like very direct, obvious things that you should look at. One is correct usage of like secure usage of the API. One really really clear example of this, and like very easy, that a lot of like maybe front end developers will relate to, is React having an API method called, literally called, dangerously set inner HTML, right? So like
True.
right, like when you as a developer are, maybe thinking of using it, I hope, I hope to an extent the naming of the method here was, so brilliant that you'd know whatever you're putting there is like super dangerous, right? Like it's super risky. If this is direct user input, there's like potential XSS, waiting to happen. So you accept it, you understand it, and you know to like you need to like do something about it. Maybe you use something like DOM purify to like sanitize the XSS vector or whatever. But I mean, that is an example of like these are like, it's not a secure API usage, but like that's a very responsible usage of
Right.
the API of the framework. The other part of like the insecure API usage is other parts of it which may not be relevant for you. For example, still on the React story here, if you use JSX to define a new element, and that element is maybe an anchor tag that receives the href value for whatever URL someone wants to add. So whereas React by default, like a lot of other modern front end frameworks, will output and code correctly all of the user input. So like the risk of XSS from that happening is like completely has diminished. It doesn't do it for values that go into the HTML elements attributes. And so, if, for example, you are building an application that says, "Hey, please provide me your social profile or your personal blog URL, and I will put it, on the website thing." And that is user input, right? That you're asking me for my URL, my blog post, or whatever. And so I can provide you an FTP, scheme, an HTTPS scheme, whatever, but I can also give you, literally the string JavaScript :alert. And if you do not sanitize or do anything about it, if you're not thinking about it because you're thinking, hey, React will save you because it saves you from other places of XSS, that specific area is a sink, is where XSS will happen, because that API, that entry point is an insecure one that actually will create an XSS if the end user is able to like control that without anything going in the way. And so this is where you need to be, as a developer, very apparent or like very aware of what is secure and what is an insecure API of the framework. That is about secure coding practices. The other side of the frameworks and libraries, I will say, is you, regardless of the library, like if you're using React or I don't know, some SQL ORM, for example, SQLize or TypeORM or something else, and you use it, it's very popular, it's a very big project, you're probably unlikely to create your own ORM because it's like a really
Yeah.
gigantic task. So that's fine of using it, and it's fine if vulnerabilities like get discovered. Like no one's perfect, we all make create bugs as we create code, and we all unfortunately create security vulnerabilities. But just like staying up to date with those vulnerabilities, like knowing that they happen and having a clear path and automated way of just proactively getting those updates, so like you can be on the new version that gets the security fix, etc., really really fast. That is super important for you to be able to have like a really fast and mature CI/CD pipeline, so when there's like a fix, you can deploy it in an instant to your production environment and so on. So staying up to date with vulnerabilities is the one thing, and the other one is, as we said, like being aware of secure coding conventions within the framework's guidelines.
That's major. But are these frameworks? I mean, I'm not I'm not a major React developer, but is this vulnerability that you mentioned, that sync, documented somewhere within React's documentation, or how do I know about it otherwise?
Yeah. So I do my best as a developer advocate. Like literally have talks about hacking as React
Right.
production applications through that, because I do want to like convey that and like make other developers aware of it. I don't remember if I mean, last time I checked, I haven't seen any specific reference to that on the React docs. Maybe that has changed, so I don't remember anything specifically called out for it. Um, Obviously the named one with the dangerously set inner HTML
Right.
has specific guidelines, plus the name should be a
Yeah.
good first alert. But yeah, Angular does have like a good Angular and I think Vue specifically. Yeah, so I think that's one thing that I found with Angular and Vue. Angular and Vue.js both have specific dedicated sections for like if you Google Angular security or something like that, like the first page you'll probably land into is like the dedicated security guidelines of what is a security issue that you need to worry about. I don't remember seeing that with React. Like I know some methods, like the dangerous one, is kind of documented somewhere, and they have like a really big red note around it. But I don't remember there's like a specific dedicated place for I don't know, like a guideline of curating everything.
Right. Right. Because that would, I mean, that I feel like that would be the responsible thing to do, to show you, how to use the framework, but also how to not use it, or
Yeah.
how to avoid these kind of problems. But it's definitely also kind of the responsibility of developer, knowing at least what kind of things can go wrong. And again, coming into a code, you mentioned XSS quite a bit, and that is when you kind of let the essentially user input be whatever you want, and then it can potentially be misused and run by the browser. The annoying user could potentially run JavaScript code and make requests and get information, or even change the way your application behaves. What kind of other similar problems or security vulnerabilities are, or should developers be aware of to at least go out and research and make sure that they're not present in their current projects?
It's a good question. I would say some of this. So the obvious. So XSS is actually a type of like a code injection. It's just like specifically a JavaScript kind of code injection into a page. But code injection in general has like varied usage or appearances in code, that it could be things like template injections, like if you're using something like Express and HBS to like generate Vue.js pages or whatever, like you could literally have template injection issues. um, Code injection in general, and depending in the way that you do things, especially like if users are able to like do like evil kind of things on the node runtime, and it doesn't mean that you use it, but essentially maybe they have found a way for that to happen. um, those are really clear ones to look at. On the server side, I would say SQL injections, like being careful. Sometimes, like I realize developers might be kind of like dropping the usage of the ORM because they need like complexities or
Right.
performance from like raw SQL kind of things. So being aware that like that could potentially be insecure codes, like knowing how to do it correctly, is a definitely big one. Plus, uh, prototype pollution is a tricky one because for most of the time, like this is very JavaScript specific to begin with. Plus, I think most of the time when people discuss it or like mention it, it's like with a bad connotation, as in it's a prototype pollution in something like Jest or something which is like a dev dependency, and like literally who cares about that. But other times people will also like give it a bad connotation in terms of like what's the worst that can happen. Um, Thing is, there are really severe things that could happen if like you are literally and like actually vulnerable to prototype pollution issues. Aaron Hammer in his blog about Happy and Joy have like discussed that to an extent. This is from a couple of years ago. I also have like a demo of like type ORM as like again like an ORM and SQL library kind of thing, being vulnerable to prototype pollution, and I have a demo of like how being vulnerable to that allows me to then run SQL injections and some other things. So like it's a vector of attack for like a chained vulnerabilities, right? Like chained attacks. Um, and I will maybe end with a last one. Like I'm not gonna enumerate everything, but at least
Right.
one other thing which I've seen kind of like happening a lot is recently too, is like insecure direct object references, so known as IDOR. Essentially, the fact that if you go to say slash your website.com slash user slash one or something like that, and regardless of whether that number is enumerable or not, because it's like an increasing ordered key, uh, but if you do not do any authorization checks that ensuring that the user actually has access to that, that is a really it's like a really easy to fix but also easy to find vulnerability. And I've literally seen reports and like bug bounty reports on this for vulnerabilities on this thing, which sounds like really silly, that to check that you actually have access to like that record.
Right.
But I've found is for like companies like Shopify and Microsoft and Facebook. So obviously all employ brilliant developers, yet still that problem happens. And most of the time, IDORs are just like that vulnerability to get in and do more more damage, like employing like code injection and command injection and whatever else. So um, take please like think about authorization, all of those things when you're doing code on the server or on the front end side is like super important.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when you have your front end and your API separate, and you might assume that just because coded a safe and secure front end, in the sense that it will never through the front end like reach things that it shouldn't, it doesn't mean that someone is not gonna inspect the network tab and then figure out your
Yeah.
API and then attack it better. So
Yep.
absolutely. All right, awesome. I think we're kind of over time, so I'm gonna jump into the quick round, which is 3 questions that we ask every developer. But before that, thank you for educating all of us, including me, on the security issues. I mean, this is definitely, like I said at the beginning, a huge topic, something worth more than just one episode. But we should eventually get you back in and get deep in within at least some of these issues, because I think a lot of people will benefit from that. But anyway, going back to the quick round. First question: what is the best advice you ever received?
It's a good one. I would go with having the ability to debug is super important. Like knowing, like when you're facing a problem, knowing what to look for, knowing like how to compartmentalize the problem, knowing how to do like like a binary search kind of like of the problem, like eliminate 50% of
Right.
what's not really the issue, is like a super important one. And so I'd echo that and say like this is, regardless of like whatever you do in software engineering, this is like super important skill to have.
Absolutely. All right. What is the most exciting project you worked on?
The most exciting project I worked on,
Yes.
um about a more than a decade ago, I had this going back to the early PHP days of the
Wow.
internet. Yes, I've
I,
had
I
this.
was there too. I was there too. So
Thank you. I was feeling old already here. Now we can be all together.
yeah, yeah,
Couple of old timers on a call.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, so I was, this is, I don't know, circa 2007 or so. I was building a project for managing like Radius, like that's like authentication and accounting and authorization kind of thing for accounts. Literally my first, I think, like actual web project thing. um, it's for me, it's like maybe the most I don't know if exciting or fulfilling, because uh, that project is it still exists today. It's actually still, like, I don't maintain it today,
Yeah.
but it's still active. Like people actually use it and they ask questions and whatever. But the most fulfilling part about it, like, this is also back in those days. This is, I don't know who else can remember this besides the two old timers here on the call, but back then, like, internet wasn't that ubiquitous as it is today. Like you had to, like, get like if you sat at a coffee place, you had like to get like a hotspot, username and password or whatever. So what this project did is basically manage the whole hotspot Wi-Fi thing for you. So I know I was like on calls and emails back then of like people literally building like a Wi-Fi hotspot business on top of it, and they were like
Wow.
selling internet and whatever. And this was mostly like not like US or Europe. This was like very out regional places, like Africa continent, Thailand, places like that, like South America. So this was by far the most fun project I've ever worked on.
Nice. Interesting. All right. And final question: what is one thing you wish you knew before you started coding that you eventually picked up during the years?
I wish I knew. I wish I knew the foundations first really well before I dive into it, because I kind of like I just dived in. I was like, this is amazing. Like I can build things.
Right.
I just like went in straight up, started building things, and a lot of it was uh, trial and error, and like not reading a book and then going through it, or like following a tutorial or whatever would be like a good kind of like structured learning. But I would just like read code, kind of like understand what it does, then I would say copy paste, but by the
Right.
time I was doing it, we did not have Stack Overflow, so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't actually copy paste from anywhere except my head. um, but yeah, like, so I think like a fresh person should probably I mean, it's fun, I don't regret it, but I think having good foundations of like, maybe computer science, maybe like, the way code works and stuff like that is like super important. So, do invest in those areas. It's like super important.
Absolutely, absolutely. I remember when I started with C and reading about, like, these tutorials about pointers. And I was like, who needs pointers? And just keep it. And eventually, get into college and say, oh yeah, that's what they were used for. All right, that one, yeah,
And then allocating enough memory for that and checking it so you don't
yeah,
get
yeah,
buffer overflows. Yes. Fun stuff.
absolutely, yeah, yeah. All right, that's all the time we had. Thank you, Laren. Again, it was a real pleasure having you
Thank you
on the
so much.
podcast. Yeah,
You're
it was
amazing.
awesome. Just final question here, or ask from me. Can you tell our audience where they can find you? So if they want to know more about security, if they want to know more about anything that you do.
Yeah, sure. So I'm on. If you have any questions or anything, please feel free to reach out. Of course, after this, I'm on Twitter on a handle Liran_Tal. Also hang out on the DevSecOps community Slack. So if you just, I don't know, Google that, you'll find this. The Discord, not the Slack. And yeah, I do a bunch of stuff with the community. So feel free if there's anything you want to get involved, and I can help you get there.
Awesome. All right. We'll have all those links in the show notes for people interested. Again, that's it. Thank you. Thank you so much. And to everyone listening, thank you for listening, and catch you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.